We're here today at Murdoch University at the Media Arts Centre to talk to Glenda Satne. My name is Anne Schwenkenbecher. I'm the Academic Chair of Philosophy here at Murdoch University, and Glenda is here to talk to me about her philosophical work. Glenda is Associate Professor of Philosophy at the University of Wollongong and is a philosopher of mind and interested also in social ontology. Welcome, Glenda.
Thank you very much.
Glenda, you're very interested in how we act together, how we think together, and how we come to understand each other. And you think in order to explore our minds and understand better how our minds work, we really need to think about the social aspect of human beings. And it really needs to involve thinking about also other people and how we interact with them. And one of the theories that you have been writing about is the theory or the framework of enactivism. And I just wanted to first hear from you, what is this framework of enactivism? How is it different perhaps from other frameworks for studying cognition and the mind? And why, in your view, do you think it is better than others?
Yes, so a lot of traditional philosophy of mind, and especially philosophy of cognitive sciences, have been using a framework in which the focus is on the individual, and the focus is also on the psychological capacities of the individual, or in cog-sci, specifically on how the brain works, how the individual brain works. And so the investigation of the brain and how the brain then represents the environment or represents other people. And there also has been a focus on the mechanisms through which the brain will do this, and that is informed by the idea that the brain will work as a computer. Now, in activism within a broader framework of what is called the 4E accounts, that are the embodied, enacted, embedded, and extended accounts of the mind, they have challenged this view, this mainstream view of how human cognition works, and for that matter, how cognition works more broadly in the natural world. And according to this view, we need to start with organisms. And organisms are alive, and they engage with an environment, and they act and have engage in activities within that environment. So we have an organism that is active and active, that it's developing activities within that environment, and it's developing these activities in relation with an environment. So it's an interested organism that it's actually interacting with this world in order to survive, but in that activity, there's investment of meaning to that environment. And this organism is also relating to other organisms. So we have relationships with things in the world, and also relationship with other organisms, including conspecifics, but not only. A slightly different framework called the distributed cognition framework. It emphasizes that cognition it's not only the activity of an individual related with other organisms and the world, but actually that cognition is distributed. That means that cognition doesn't happen only in sort of the individual organism, but it actually happens in a distributed manner. Think, for example, of navigating a boat in a storm. Different people will be doing different things in this boat to keep it afloat, and there will be roles. So it is highly distributed how we are navigating, how we're doing this activity of actually getting through the storm together. The other thing I will add is that since cognition is ongoing activity, it unfolds in time. It unfolds in time and it unfolds in space. So we have processes rather than representations as sort of static states plus operations over those representations. In my case, I've been particularly interested in the social aspect of cognition. If cognition is about openness to the world, engagement with environment, objects, and also others, how does this relationship with others shape cognition? And in this, I have been especially exploring how human cognition is influenced, shaped, structured, determined, guided by these interactions with others. And I do explore this in different ways. I'm interested in how really taking seriously the idea that engagement with others, which I also sometimes refer to as collective activity or shared activity, how does those activities in evolutionary history might have shaped the way we cognize, the way humans specifically cognize. For example, I believe that the development of specific kinds of structures and setups in those shared activities, such as social practices, which we find, of course, as well in chimps and bonobos, how those social practices involving different kinds of instruments and tools through the history of the hominid evolution might have transformed human cognition, and especially the development of language and the sort of a specific symbolic and abstract operations that allows. So when I think about human cognition, I'm thinking of a fairly distributed system with all of these different elements operating. And it's important to realize that once you abandon the assumption that everything has to be attributed to the individual organism or the individual brain, then the whole shape of a number of different philosophical questions, psychological questions, and cognitive science questions really change.
So it is basically a departure from many traditional or conservative models of looking at what it means to think, what it means to know, for even understanding how the mind works, I take it. And one of the areas you're applying this to, or you're very interested in, is theories of collective action. You are very interested in what it means for people to act together and how collective action works exactly. So can you tell us how this enactivist framework helps us to better understand these notions of collective action and how we achieve things together, which is just a pervasive feature of human life, that we do things all together all the time and in groups. So I understand that traditionally, you know, an individualist framework on in the theory of action would have perhaps prevented us from noticing or understanding certain features of social action, of collective action. So you probably have a different approach to this coming from this enactivist perspective, I take it.
Some of the theories that try to analyze, or frame, or conceptualize how we interact with one another or how we engage in joint action or collective action think that in order for this to happen, there has to be these states, individual mental states that each one of the interactants have about what the other people are doing and about what they are going to do. And it's only through that plus some form of common knowledge of those mental states that we can actually act together in a way in which we can unfold this activity through time, because we need to be able to predict what the other is going to do so that we can adjust our own behavior, right? If we go back to the example of the ship in the storm, in order for me to know what to do, I might need to be kind of making hypotheses about what you're going to do. And that would require a lot of mental activity on my part, whether that it's explicit or is implicit or has been somehow ingrained in me through the evolution of human history. But there's an alternative way of thinking about this, which is that a lot of these activities that we do together, and I agree completely with what you were saying, most, if not everything we do, somehow involves other people. And I think there are very different things we do together. So I'm interested in trying to understand better are these different forms of collective action or shared action. I use collective as an umbrella term for actions that involve more than one individual. And these different activities sometimes they only depend on us coordinating our bodies together. So, you know, we might engage in a spontaneous dancing together, or we might engage in playing music spontaneously together. And that might be about both following the music, which is this external scaffold, this external object that it's part of what is happening between us, and also that we coordinate. But I don't think that requires that I'm making very complicated guesses or hypotheses about what you're going to do. I think this could happen at the very level of the embodied relations and maybe the emotions we are having as we listen to the same music, right? But this is different when we consider, for example, actions that happen in the context of an institution. where, for example, we work at a university, and the university is making some decisions towards how we are going to teach, and then so there will be a committee that makes these decisions, then is communicated, then the people in charge of the teaching will do these actions following procedures, and there are assigned roles. I think this is a very good example to see how much happens externally to the individual psychological capacities. There are the systems we have constructed. We have not only language, but we have procedures that establish roles. And so we have these conventional ways of establishing who does what and when. So how and why we do what we do, which I think is an interesting instruction tree across different cases of collective action. But in this case, this has crystallized in a series of procedures. And those are out there. And people involved in these institutions might know more or less about them. They don't really need to know all the details. They might consult the details when they need to, or they might even consult another person that actually knows the details. And somehow, all of this system of different people related through these procedures achieve actions together, achieve things that nobody could do alone. I think that's another interesting feature about collective action, because collective actions sometimes are things that people could do alone, but many times are things that it would be impossible to do alone. And I think, again, that's a very important thing to understand how human cognition works, because it's something that then it becomes plausible, emerge through the creation of something that a lot of different individuals or organisms did together and created in those structures, those practices, which, as I said, involve different kinds of tools, instruments. Yet another kind of case is when we consider actions that are informed by social norms. So this is yet again different from the institutional case or the coordination case. We have some patterns of behavior that we expect each other to somehow obey or follow, and that when people don't follow them, there will be some kind of penalization over that. And that is, again, pervasive in human societies. I think not only human societies, but definitely in human societies. And these involve different kinds of things. They might be about how people should dress or sit or talk. And they might also affect how people should marry or establish partnerships. And those are more informal. Sometimes they crystallize in institutional settings and laws. Sometimes they don't. So I think we have a great variety of different ways in which collective action happens. And I explore the characteristics of these different collective activities. And I believe some features of these activities, some patterns, some of features that are shared between these activities can be found, which I also find interesting in order to make sense of how is it that these collective actions work. It's about distribution of roles. People can be doing different things. They don't need to do the same things. It's also about external scaffolds that exist, like music and procedures and social norms. And it's also about having at least some degree of understanding of what are we supposed to do next, but maybe not a lot. So I think a lot of the properties or attributes or features that people have been finding in those different activities are had to a certain degree.
So, do you think this approach completely challenges traditional ideas of rationality and autonomy? Because obviously, particularly in philosophy, but not just in philosophy, we thought of the individual, as at least to some degree autonomous, and we've also been upholding the idea of individual rationality as an ideal, really, of an agent that is autonomous. So, I'm guessing from what you're saying, there we would need to depart from some of those ideas, and that might have ramifications, not just ramifications for our philosophical theories, but also real world ramifications, as in perhaps how we apply the law or how we should, in the sciences, study individuals.
Well, I don't think that it really challenges the idea of rationality. Yes, it does challenge certain ways in which different theories have thought that rationality exists the way it exists, that it exists in individual minds in a way in which that is different from being realized in social structures. So in saying that, I think other philosophers in other theories do agree that rationality could be instantiated in social structures. But let me say a little bit more about what I mean by this. So I think, precisely as you were saying, it seems to follow from the picture I was giving that a lot of what we do, we are kind of partially aware of what we're doing. We are not completely in control of what we're doing. And as far as we don't have these kinds of knowledge or understanding or the control, so we are not autonomous in the sense that we are not able to completely govern what we do according to what we want to do and what we think is right to do. And I think to a certain extent this is true. So I think we live in societies, in the social world, and the social world dictates how we behave or we should behave. So there are limits to what we can do and the control we can have over what we do because we live with others and our life is completely scaffolded and shaped by those different structures and interactions. That means that individually, many times, we won't be completely in control of situations. There are a number of important things to stress about this. One is that we can reflect on the structures we have and the social norms we have. And this, as I was saying before, it's because we have particular norms and we have developed symbolic systems, including language, that have transformed human cognition in ways in which we can actually reflect about what we are doing and why we are doing it in an explicit manner. We can consider reasons for why a certain way of doing things is good or bad, or is unfair, or is unjust, or is immoral. And we take some distance of that through our special capacities of rationality, which I do believe we have. The way of like sort of progressing in having better, more, if you like, lives aligned with what is right, what is good, in a way that we can find it autonomous and sort of we can rationally endorse it, is to really transform these structures in which we live. So I don't think we can achieve that state of complete sort of rational autonomy on our own. We actually need others, and we also need to transform the social structures we have to actually make that possible.
So that seems to have ramifications then for a theory of knowledge, right? For epistemology, for what we can know and what it means to know something, and the extent perhaps to which the things we do know and can know also depend on the social environment in which we move and on the particular interactions we have with people. And it suggests also that we're quite vulnerable then to, I guess, perhaps flaws of the particular social systems we're in. Do you think your approach helps us also understand how there's the social dimension to knowledge and how what we know is influenced also so much by the environment in which we operate, and can also lead to perhaps, flawed beliefs and problematic assumptions and misconceptions?
I think this kind of view, where we really take seriously the role of groups and social structures and relationships with each other to understand the human mind and human nature, has consequences for how we understand knowledge. And we live in environments where other people, including people that lived in the past, have left us books, but also other objects that encapsulate knowledge. And we are also going to leave this for future generations. So there is a collective responsibility for knowledge that we have in common, we share. And it also means that this can go wrong. It means that we can be in environments that do not facilitate knowledge, or that even have false beliefs taken as knowledge, or maybe whether there is fundamental failures in knowing, more in the sense of ignorance. So I think incorporating this idea that it's also the sort of social environment that is really shaping the possibilities we have means that the responsibility is not only in the individual, and it's not about I need to find enough evidence or enough reasons to support what I believe, but it's also about how can I make this environment better for other people and how others are making this available for me. So I think this requires to think of knowledge in a very profoundly social manner.
Thank you. I'm also interested in whether you think that this idea of distributed cognition, whether you think that's unique to humans or whether we can find that in other species as well.
I want to make a distinction between two different ways in which we can talk about social cognition. And maybe there are more distinctions we should make, but this is one. So there is a sense in which the presence of an organism in an environment changes that environment, right? Maybe because this organism has left some traits of its presence or has transformed, eaten an apple, or even interacted further with the environment by creating a nest, for example. So there is a way in which the environment is already transformed by other creatures, and every animal lives in an environment that involves other creatures that also transform that environment. And this has a large number of consequences in terms of how different forms of solidarity and co-evolution works, because these systems they shape and inform one another. So that's one way in which there is the knowledge of others through the knowledge of the environment. It is a kind of a minimal way. But then there is also the way in which in different species there is interaction, and how these collective behaviors actually allow these different species to survive. And so we see this in birds when they migrate together and they are following the cue of the one next to them, and it's just the whole collective of birds that really manages to guide the action of each one bird. And we see this in fish. Some people argue that we see this in a slime mold. Other people think that this happens as well in plants. In my case, I agree that sociality is pervasive and it's there for every animal, but I'm very interested in trying to be more specific about how each one species is social and how that sociality works. And I think that's when you get the interesting differences. And in those differences, will speak of how those special social systems that each one has shapes the forms in which they live in the world.
Well, thank you so much for the interview, Glenda.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this interview.